you. Good morning and welcome to all who registered to attend our Middle East Peace Now June Forum. I am Kathleen Campbell, Secretary of the Board of Middle East Peace Now. We sincerely thank our sponsors for this event, Northfielders for Justice in Palestine, Israel, Jewish Voice for Peace, and Women Against Military Madness. We greatly appreciate these organizations' support of MEPN's monthly forums. Please consider attending these organizations' own excellent events as well. I have two brief announcements. First, as is typical, MEPN will not present a July forum. But on August 16th, MEPN will host an in-person summer picnic at Roslyn Park in Edina, Minnesota. Our guest speakers that day are Jenny and Fred Hartley, who will share their recent experience of living in Ramallah, Palestine. Please see the MEPN website for details and join us if you are in town. My second announcement is that a petition is going forward to pursue a sister city relationship between Bethlehem and St. Paul, Minnesota. We will keep you appraised as the proposal progresses. Before I introduce our speaker, fellow MEPN board member Ruby Joy will share some information about today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Thank you all for joining us today. We just have a couple of notes that we ask you to keep in mind. For our webinar today, all participants will be muted for the duration of the event. And we hope that you will submit questions using the Q&A feature of Zoom here when we open our conversation up for questions for Reverend Dr. Isaac. And feel free to use the chat feature for any questions that I can help you with that are administrative or technically based. We'll do our best. And we expect that all are respectful in both the chat and the Q&A. We reserve the right to remove anyone who is causing harm. And feel free to email mepn@mepn.org if any technical issues arise as well, or for any further questions about our programming. And our webinar is being recorded today, and you can find it on our YouTube channel, as well as our website and our Facebook in the next few days. As well as we'll be putting our post-forum survey in the chat a couple of times, and we would love to receive your responses. This is super helpful information for our organization as we curate forums that are most interesting and desired by our membership. And with that, I will turn it over to Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac.
Actually, please, before that, I'll say a few words. Our guest speaker today is Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, and Munther is the pastor of Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem, Palestine. He also serves as academic dean of Bethlehem Bible College. Munther has traveled and spoken extensively in the United States. His topic today is the ongoing Nakba, 75 years later. He will speak for 40 minutes or so, and after that, I will ask him the questions that you, our listeners, have typed into the questions function. So here we go. Munther, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. And I guess it's good morning, your time in Minneapolis and St. Paul and wherever you are joining this webinar. Thank you for Middle East Peace Now for this invitation to address this important topic, and thank you for the introduction. I will be speaking about the Nakba. Nakba is an Arabic word that means catastrophe, and focusing about the Palestinian experience for the last 75 years. There's no doubt that I will be speaking as a Palestinian and as a Palestinian Christian about an experience that we are witnessing and living on a daily basis. This is not a webinar about history. As I will show and clearly demonstrate, I hope, the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe, is an ongoing reality. And no doubt that it all began for us as Palestinians at the beginning or late in the 19th century with the establishment of the Zionist movement. But even before the establishment of the Zionist movement, many European countries, leaders, church leaders, began as if dreaming of creating a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine as a first part of their of the Jewish people's restoration, as it was described. And so Palestine was spoken of as a nation, a country without a nation, for a nation without a country. This attitude sums up our tragedy as Palestinians. The fact that the world does not see us. They look at Palestine and they don't see the Palestinian people. I will focus on what happened in 1948 when Israel was created. When Israel was created, it was not created on an empty land. The land was never without people. The land has always had people. And I would like to refer you to the important book by Palestinian historian Noor Masalha, which is called Palestine, 4,000 Years of History, that clearly demonstrated that Palestine as a land has always been inhabited by people with a strong culture, strong and many diverse cultures and peoples who lived in Palestine. It was never empty. So when Israel was created by the European Jewish immigrants, it was not created on an empty land. Something had to give. And Palestinians paid the price for this to happen. By the numbers, around 800,000 Palestinians were expelled from the land, were forced to become refugees. More than around 500 Palestinian towns and villages were completely destroyed, removed from the face of the earth. You know, when Israel was created later, they burned these towns and villages and planted trees on their place so that people will not come back to these places. And of course, these places might have been destroyed, but they were never removed from the memory of Palestinians and Palestinian refugees who can still, you know, who still say we come not just from Palestine, but name the village and the town that they were forced to leave. So 500 towns and villages, more than 800,000 Palestinian refugees, thousands who were killed. It was all done in a systematic plan to empty the land. Many historians, first Palestinians and then Israelis and Palestinian eyewitnesses, but I'm talking now about what historians said, spoke of a systematic plan that was executed by the Zionist forces in the 40s, 46, 47, 48. And that plan was designed to empty the land from its Palestinian Arab inhabitants. The concept was simple: maximum land, minimum people. And this is a really important concept to highlight if we are going to understand why I argue, and many argue, that the Palestinian Nakba continues. Because the concept of maximum land and minimum people continues to govern the policies of the state of Israel today. In other words, forcible displacement of Palestinians have not stopped. It happened en masse in 1948, as I said, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced to leave. And when, there was a plan to cleanse the land as if from the Palestinian Arabs. And it continues today. Israel was created on 78% of historical Palestine, which far exceeds what was proposed from the United Nations in the partition plan. And I'm not saying that I agree with the partition plan or that Palestinians should have agreed with the partition plan. The partition plan was, supposed to give almost half of the land or more, 55 to the Israelis, I think, to the state of Israel. The problem is, again, why would you assume as colonial powers that you have the right to divide lands based on ethnicities? Sadly, this is not the only place this happened. We can just reference India and Pakistan as an example. So 78% of historical Palestine was lost to give room for the new Israeli state. And let me pause here and zoom in on the Christian impact, on the impact the Nakba had on the Christian community. Because, conservative estimates puts the number of Palestinian Christian refugees at 50,000. Others put it as high as 90,000 Palestinian Christian refugees. At the beginning of the 20th century, Palestinian Christians made more than 12% of the population of historic Palestine. Immediately after the Nakba, that number dropped to 2%. A recent study has shown, was able to document around 30 congregations that ceased to exist after the Nakba. 30 churches no longer exist. So when you think of the Christian presence, and everyone talks about the Christian presence in the Holy Land and how we can, let us remember that a big blow to the Christian presence in the Holy Land happened in 1948. And sadly, among the 5 million Palestinian refugees today, there are many Palestinian Christian refugees as well. Some of whom live in refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria, some of whom in Jordan, and they all dream of even visiting their homeland. Some have this spiritual connection of praying in Jerusalem, but are still denied that right. So the Nakba, and as I will point out later, an event that is celebrated by the Christian world, because they celebrate the creation of Israel, was a big blow on the Christian presence in the Holy Land. And this is where, it hurts a lot for us as Christians when fellow Christians continue to celebrate what happened in 1948 because they don't see us. They don't want to see us. They'd rather ignore us and continue to ignore us. And as I said, if we understand the concept of maximum land and minimum people, we will understand why the Nakba continues today. Visitors to Palestine today will surely realize how difficult the situation is on all Palestinians. We live in a reality of fragmentation, segregation. Today, after the Nakba, I continue to refer how we as Palestinians, after 1948, have been divided into at least 6 categories. Imagine what a catastrophe means when one people is divided to 6 categories by our occupiers. What do I mean by 6 categories? Today, Israel has managed not only to fragment the land into bits and pieces, but also the people. We have Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship. We have Palestinians in East Jerusalem. We have Palestinians in Gaza. We have Palestinians in the West Bank. We have Palestinians in the refugee camps and Palestinians in the diaspora with foreign passports but are not allowed to return. What that means is that we have 6, different ID cards as if, or passports. We don't have all passports. Certainly the refugee camps or East Jerusalem don't have passports. We have 6 identifications, but we're one people. And this is part of the fragmentation of the Palestinian people. And even though they have managed to defragment us politically and geographically, we're still united as a people, which is truly amazing given the circumstances. And each one of these categories have their own challenges. And Israel has created a reality in which we cannot even mix. Meaning it's very hard for a Palestinian from the West Bank to marry a Palestinian from East Jerusalem. We cannot go to Gaza, for example. Palestinians from Gaza are isolated. Palestinians in the refugee camps cannot return home. The millions of Palestinians who were not present in Palestine when Israel occupied it, and before that when England occupied it, were denied the right to return to their homes, are still denied the right to return to their homes. Meanwhile, any Jewish person can immigrate and claim our land as their home and live on Israeli Jewish settlements built on the remaining 22% that was given to us after that was not part of Israel, because Israel continues to expand its borders. The problem with the state of Israel today is that it has not yet defined its borders. And definitely the recent nation-state laws and many other laws have considered the building of Jewish settlements on the West Bank a Jewish right, claiming and calling all the land as land of Israel. And the recent Israeli coalition, I think this is really important not to miss, the recent Israeli coalition began by stating, when they formed the government, they stated that all the land, that Jews have an exclusive and inalienable right over all the land of Israel. And to them, all the land is land of Israel. So this has been clearly, they stress that all of it is Jewish land. They don't see us. They don't give us room. We cannot have equal rights. This confirms the nation-state law, which passed a few years ago, that claimed that the right for self-determination is exclusive to the Jewish people only. So what Israel has been doing for 70 years is simply this: maximize their land, first by occupying 78% and ethnically cleansing Palestinians from it. Second, by expanding its territory on the West Bank by building Jewish settlements and expanding their areas on areas, what is known as Area C in the West Bank, and in effect annexing it, continuing to forcibly displace Palestinians through denying them the right to return, through the restrictions, through not granting spouses the right to reunite together. There are many Palestinian spouses who cannot even live together. And it's a hassle just to get the documents many times, especially between the West Bank and East Jerusalem, or the West Bank and Gaza, to be united as families together. So they're trying to push us out. They're trying to maximize the land and fragment us and implement segregation on the ground, while granting Jewish supremacy and Jewish rights over our rights, even though we've been living in this land for generations. And this has been clearly described as apartheid by several legal organizations and human rights organizations. So the ongoing Nakba means that we are now living in what has been established by many as apartheid. And I want to pause on the term apartheid, because using a term like apartheid is not a matter of opinion. It's not of what do I feel about apartheid. It's not what do I think about, what is your opinion. Apartheid has a legal definition accepted by the international community. And apartheid, by the way, is a crime in the international law. And I know that there is a big war against using this word today in the United States and in Europe. And I say avoiding using this word means that we don't care about the international law. The international law does not apply on the strong powers. on the dominant powers. It only applies on the weak. And this is the tragedy of our world today. We have these human rights organizations and human rights laws, and we have these international, they don't apply on the international powers, on the big powers, on the big shots. And by the way, let's not remember how many times there were decisions in the UN that were vetoed by America against Israel. How many UN resolutions that were not implemented because no one is able to impose, for example, sanctions on Israel or to hold Israel accountable, because Israel is never held accountable for what it's doing. I mean, and as I will say later, even as we try to hold Israel accountable, we are punished as Palestinians or our allies. So this is the ongoing Nakba of Palestinians, our ongoing displacement. We continue to lose land. We continue to be denied our rights. Friends, the Nakba is not about what happened 75 years ago. The Nakba is our ongoing reality. And this is, the Nakba was the result of apartheid, of Zionism. Zionism, we're seeing today the fruits of Zionism. And one of our pleas to the world is to stop trying to, hide what Zionism is, and try to pretend that Zionism was something else, that Zionism was something good. Because today we're seeing the fruits of Zionism, an exclusive, ethnocentric ideology that dismisses everyone else. An ideology that has promoted Jewish supremacy over against everyone else. An ideology that has created a reality of apartheid as explained by several human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, many UN reports, many Israeli human rights organizations. So our Nakba today as Palestinians continue. It's not a matter of an historical event that happened 75 years ago. And now as I look at these things as a Christian, I continue to be troubled by the fact that countries and churches continue to release statements celebrating the creation of the state of Israel, while ignoring what that state did to the Palestinians and continues to do to the Palestinians. We have become irrelevant. And as Palestinian theologian Mitri Raheb argues, we as the Palestinian Christian people of the land have been replaced and ignored and dismissed. I talk about our dehumanization. Let's be honest, whenever the Western world, whenever Western Christians think of the Holy Land, they think of Israel and the Jewish people. They no longer think of the Christians on the Holy Land. They no longer think of how to maintain a Christian presence and Christian witness in the place where it all started. Sadly, theology continues to be a problem. Theology and the Bible continue to be weaponized against us as Palestinians and against us as Palestinian Christians. The fact that Israel continues to be celebrated, that fact alone is problematic. And then you bring the theology that justifies it. And you can have different ways of articulating it. For evangelicals, it's a fulfillment of prophecy. It's a sign of the second coming of Christ. It's a preparation for maybe a big global war and the Jewish restoration, meaning their conversion to Christianity before the end. For many liberal Christians or mainline Protestants or even Catholics, Israel is a sign of God's faithfulness to the Jewish people. It's a sign that God has not abandoned his people, meaning the Jewish people. It's a sign of the continuous covenant between God and the Jewish people. And so for us as Palestinian Christians, as if it's a double Nakba, a double Kata, we have been forced to answer to all of these positions that have turned the Bible from good news into a nightmare, that has weaponized the Bible, because the Bible to us has become part of the problem when people use it in such a way. I hope you're saying, you get what I'm saying, because when you say, for example, a simple statement like Jews return to their land, or Jews return to their homeland, or to the land of their ancestors, you immediately put me as a Palestinian in this very awkward position, as if I am the problem, as if I have been occupying someone else's land. Put it in very simple terms sometimes, imagine if someone knocks on your door in Minnesota or whatever, St. Paul, and says, and you open the door and says, no, excuse me, I'm just returning to my house. Could you give me your house? What would you say? And then what if, to add to that, someone says, well, yeah, because my God promised me that house 4,000 years ago. And then you have your pastors telling you, yeah, that's true, actually, you have to leave. Even though you worked in this house, lived in this house for generations, we've only, see, when Palestinians talk about their land, we're not talking about a political disputed land. We're talking about land we've owned and farmed for generations. See, this is where the problem becomes maybe a double problem for us as Palestinian Christians when the Bible is weaponized. And today we're seeing another layer to this Christian support to Israel. When Christians continue to continue to refuse to hold Israel accountable for what it's saying, under the pretext of diplomacy, peacemaking, neutrality, avoid aggressive and strong language. You see, over the years, I engage a lot with church leaders, and oftentimes I hear, maybe your approach is too strong, maybe you should be soft. Many times they say, we pray for both sides equally. We pray for peace. The church should be neutral. And I think there is a problem with such an approach, because it equates the oppressor with the oppressed. It portrays it as a conflict, even though it's not a conflict. In reality, there is one side dominating the other, and Christians must learn to take sides. The name of this organization, Middle East Peace Now, what leads to peace? Is it neutrality? Is it the soft diplomatic approach where you pray for both? What we need is prophetic peace that takes sides, that speaks to power, that call things by their name. This is what we need. We can't avoid this shallow diplomacy where churches only pray for peace and maybe send us their best and wishes and sometimes charity for us as Palestinians, and continue by doing so to empower our oppressors. If we insist on not holding Israel accountable, the problem many times is that even when we say, okay, you don't want to hold Israel accountable, at least allow us and others to do so, and then even then we're attacked. You see, when we say, please hold Israel accountable, we're called all sorts of things. We become the problem. We shouldn't talk, for example, about sanctioning Israel or boycotting Israeli goods. We shouldn't use the A word, the apartheid word. That has become a problem to us Palestinians. Even our right to resist our occupiers have been put into question and challenged and taken from us as Palestinians. To me, this is the real scandal, when Christians refuse to call things by their name under the name of diplomacy or being neutral. In the last 10 minutes, I would like to look forward. And as I said, we're talking about 75 years of ongoing Nakba. But where are we heading? And I would like to shift how we look at things from talking about 75 years of Nakba into also emphasizing that it has also been 75 years of Palestinian resilience and hope. It has been 75 years of Palestinian resilience. You see, after all these years, after all these policies, after 75 years of the Nakba, 60 after what happened in 7 and the occupation of the land, after Oslo, after these policies and checkpoints and restrictions, and the forcible displacement of Palestinians and the scattering of Palestinian families, we're still here. We're not going anywhere. Even Palestinian Christians have survived despite all the odds. We're still here. We lament the fact that many have left. But remember that there are also strong and resilient Palestinians who refuse to leave and who are still here. And today in the land, after all these years, we're still talking about 7 million Palestinians versus 7 million Israeli Jews. As such, to me, this is the biggest sign of hope. Because ultimately, in this reality, we have to find ways to live together. And please understand, our message as Palestinians, as at least the majority of Palestinians and definitely the Palestinian Christian community, have never been that we should destroy Israel or get rid of all, the state of Israel, or as if, expel the Jews from the land. Our message has always been want peace. We want to live peace and share the land with our neighbors who are here now. We have to find ways to share the land, but that way cannot be under the pretext of occupation and apartheid and one side dominating the other. This can't last. And maybe one way of looking forward is to realize Israel as it is. And remember, once we remember how Israel was started, we can look forward, because Israel, at the end of the day, was and is a settler colonial entity. Israel was started by European settlers. And we know how all these ends, injustice and settler colonialism can never last. Injustice and one side dominating the other can never last. Ultimately, not just justice will prevail, but equality will prevail as well. Ultimately, we will find ways to share the land together. Those who know me, sometimes, I find myself really in, looking around, it's really dark, especially these days. I mean, honestly, I've never seen the situation in more despair as I look around me today. But at the same time, we are a people of hope. And hope lies in the fact that truth will always prevail. I am in Bethlehem, and I can always point to behind the wall that separates us from Jerusalem, where there is an empty tomb that reminds us that life will always overcome death, that light will always overcome darkness, that justice will always overcome injustice. We can never lose sight of this. And even as we look at history, we see that one empire has come after the other, but as Reverend Mitre Raheb has articulated in one of his books, the words of Jesus that the meek will inherit the earth are always true. They might not look true initially. We look around us and we see the power of the empires, but ultimately empires come and go and the meek inherit the land. This is the power of Jesus's words. And this is ultimately what continues to give us hope as Palestinians and as Palestinian Christians. What this means for the future, don't ask me. Am I talking about one state or two states or a confederate? What I know is that the current status quo is unsustainable. It cannot last. And sadly, it's causing many, many victims, young Palestinians, and sometimes Israelis as well. We're all victims of this situation. But we cannot move forward unless we put an end to this systematic injustice. We cannot move forward until the world realizes that we must hold Israel accountable. So when people ask me, what do you think should happen How do you think we should move forward with one state, two states, and so on? I say, I don't want to talk about what will happen, because what we need right now as Palestinians are several things. First, we need protection. We need the immediate end of the occupation in the West Bank and the annexation of our land. We need to challenge the policies of the state of Israel. And only then we can begin talking about sharing the land. Only then we can begin, once we accept that we both belong to the land, we can really find ways. But this cannot happen if we continue on the current way, on the current status quo. And so, yes, on the one hand, it doesn't look well. Believe me, it's very, very difficult today, especially with the fragmentation, with the restrictions, with the checkpoints surrounding our cities, with Israel, suffocating our lives in between our cities and controlling everything in between. But ultimately, we know from history, we know from scripture, we know from our faith that injustice cannot last. So we will continue to resist. And as Palestinian Christians, we will continue to resist in a creative way, non-violently, in a way that sees the image of God even in our oppressor and the occupiers. I wish and pray that we will one day live in a world free of apartheid and occupation. I wish this for not just myself, but for my two children. I wish and pray that one day my two children, who are now 10 and 8, will live in a situation in which they can have Israeli friends as equals and share the same rights with all the people of this land without discrimination and segregation. 75 years of ongoing Nakba, but 75 years of ongoing Palestinian resilience and ongoing hope for peace. We will never give up our dream for liberty, justice, and dignity and freedom in our land. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to having a conversation with you. Thank you.
Well, we're ready for some questions. So thank you very much. That was really interesting. Thinking about the history that you referred to between 1947 and 1949, the Nakba, original Nakba period. Many of us are aware that all of this history is documented with photographs and on the scene descriptions that reside in the Israeli archives today. They have not been declassified. At least this is a statement of one of our attendees. Well, first of all, maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure you know about them, but also, are you fearful that Israel might destroy these documents to conceal the truth about this period of time when as many as 800 or 900,000 Palestinians were displaced and many were killed and 500 villages disappeared? So the two questions, talk a little bit about these archives, and then are you fearful that they are going to be destroyed?
Yeah, thank you. So there has been some archives that were certainly later uncovered, and it was through these archives that many historians, Israeli historians, concluded that what happened in 1948 was ethnic cleansing, using that strong language. Palestinians have documented what happened to them. Palestinians, we still have eyewitnesses to what happened in 1948. The tragedy is that no one believed Palestinians. And it wasn't until Israeli historians said these things that the world took us seriously. In other words, the Israeli narrative has always been there was war and Palestinians left. In fact, and sadly, some people still repeat that narrative, even though these archives proved otherwise. What the archives proved, and this is what is known as the new Israeli historians, and again, Palestinian historians have said this, but what the archives showed is that this was a systematic plan. And I summarized the ethos of that plan: maximum land, minimum people. Israel, for Israel to become a state, that's what they said, we had to expel the Palestinian Arabs. So they admitted on doing this. Now, will there be more classified documents that will be uncovered? I don't know. I think there is a strong, Israeli structure, and in the past, some documents were uncovered. And to be honest, I don't think Israel is now fearful of the consequences of the truth coming to the surface. This is what I mean. With the recent Israeli government, which came to effect in January of this year, many of my friends said maybe this government is a good thing, because this government will remove the mask from the face of Israeli politicians, because Israeli politicians in the past will say one thing and do the other. Right now, they're doing what they're saying: annexing the West Bank, building settlements, denying that there will be a Palestinian state, and no one is holding Israel accountable. In other words, Israeli politicians now fear nothing. And this is the scary part. And so whether the documents will uncover what we already know or not, I don't think Israel really cares about the opinion of the international community, because they continue to pressure, and no one, as I said, no one is holding Israel accountable. And this continues to be our problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about the fragmentation of Palestinians in terms of religion? One of our participants asked if you feel that you're speaking for Palestinian Muslims as well, and that's a fine question that you can address. But do you feel that the situation has caused a fragmentation between the Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims?
Not really. I think, when it comes to what happened and what continues to happen to Palestinians, I don't think that what I say about Palestinian Christians is different from what, we're all Palestinians. What happened to us in 1948 happened to us as Palestinians, not as Christians. And we've recently published a document. I can post the link on. We've recently a study on the forcible displacement of Palestinian Christians. I posted the link. And in that study, it's clear that all the policies of Israel against all Palestinians are causing Christians to leave. So we're not targeted because we are Christians. We're mainly targeted because we are Palestinians. And so when I speak about apartheid and cleansing and segregation and occupation, I am speaking on behalf of all Palestinians. I am describing what all Palestinians are going through. And I don't think that, the fragmentation is now between us as Palestinian Christians and Muslims. We as Christians make probably around maybe 10% of all the Palestinian population. The problem is that most of us live outside. In the land, we are maybe 1 to 2% of the population of Palestinians, because, as I said, the vast majority of Palestinian Christians live outside. The fragmentation of Palestinians today is geographical and political more than it is based on religion. And it's what Israel has imposed. So it's not a Palestinian Christians on one side and Palestinian Muslims on one side, but it's East Jerusalemite, a category, Gaza, and in Gaza there are Christians and Muslims. In East Jerusalem, there are Christians and Muslims. going through the same exact challenges.
Got it. Thank you. You mentioned that after 1948-49, 30 Palestinian churches ceased to exist. How many remained? I guess it's how big the amount was before that. If 30 ceased to exist, how many still existed, which gives us a count of how many there were in the first place and how many there are now?
Yeah, it's hard to number the congregation. So this study went through the history of all the Palestinian villages and towns that were destroyed and looked at each one and was there a church or was there not a church? And if there was a congregation, it was counted. So this is what this study did. So among the 500,000 villages, there were also churches that were destroyed. In fact, some churches survived in terms of the physical building, but Israel denies the people to go and pray there or to live in those towns and villages. I can give you numbers in terms of how many Palestinian Christians live in the land today. There are around 180,000 Palestinian Christians who live in the land. 130,000 live on the Israeli side, and around 45,000 live on the Palestinian side, I think 45. So that makes it between 170 to 180. By the Palestinian side, I mean West Bank, East Jerusalem, and in Gaza. There are plenty more of Palestinian Christians who live, as I said, in the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
And among those, we count Palestinian Christians who, for various reasons, left Palestine at the beginning of the 20th century, escaping the hardships of the Ottoman Empire, the heavy taxation, the forced joining the army, and so on. When England occupied the land, they gave a short ultimatum. If you return, you can claim your properties and right to live here. If you cannot return, and of course, it wasn't like they received an email and took the next plane back home to, many of these were in Latin America, and sadly, they lost the opportunity to live in their homeland. Israel implemented the same policy later. So many Palestinians, including relatives of mine, wish they could even visit our land, their land, but are denied that right. So this is in terms of number 170 to 180,000 Palestinian Christians in the land today.
Okay, thank you. This relates to the BDS movement. The right of return is one of the demands of the BDS movement, and that movement makes the Israelis extremely nervous. How do you view the right of return and how it could be negotiated so it would be feasible to implement?
Yes. So let's just put things in perspective. Those who are nervous about the right of return of the Palestinians do so when it comes to people who still hold the actual keys of their houses and who left their homes or were forced to leave their homes 75 years ago, but are perfectly fine with people claiming Palestine as their home because of religious connection to the land and saying that Jews return to their homes 2,000 years later or whatever. Do you get the irony here? And those who support Israel and claim that the right of return is problematic to Israel have no problem with Jews returning to their land thousands of years later, but not with Palestinians returning to their actual homes that they still hold keys to. This is the irony to me. This is the problem to me. And so I don't think we can deny people their right. If they may choose to live wherever they are now and compensated, that's their choice. We cannot force them to accept something against their will. There must be compensation in all accounts, because you can't just say time will heal. Is that fair? Is that justice? And so we have to consider these issues when we talk about the right of return. And the other issue is that, it's either we have the international law and the UN, or we don't. And this is my problem, is the hypocrisy of the international community. Russia invades Ukraine. We have many resolutions implemented like this. There was a resolution that granted Palestinians the right of return. Why wasn't it implemented? There seems to be always an exception when it comes to Palestinians. So this is what I mean. We either get rid of the international law and the UN and just accept that what rules this world is the powerful. This is what rules the world. They dictate the terms. Or we are serious about implementing the rule of law.
Thank you. What would you say are the most constructive actions that we as Americans can take to make sure that all Palestinians, Muslims, Christian, Druze, non-observant, are seen, and that the arc of immorality and injustice bends instead toward justice in an expedient way? We're Americans. We want to know what to do.
Hold your government accountable.
Yeah.
Hold your elected officials accountable. You are empowering, supporting, financing the situation. You are part of this. America is Israel's biggest ally, politically and financially. Your money is used in such a way. So what can you do is admit your complicity in this and hold your government accountable, hold your elected officials accountable. You elected them for a reason. We need more pressure on politicians. When it comes to what needs to happen, all those in diplomacy and in the State Department and others, when you talk to them, they know what needs to happen, and they tell us we're powerless. It's the Congress and the Senate. It's our president. When people say it's complicated, believe me, it's not that complicated. If there is a will, it will be solved. And so I hope, Americans realize that they are, in a sense, that their government is one of the key challenges to a lasting peace in the Middle East and in Palestine. So I'll make it simple. Hold your government accountable.
Okay. Another listener asks, you made a very interesting statement that the Bible is being used as a weapon against the Palestinians. Because I am a secular humanist, I appreciate your comment and would like you to please speak more about this.
Yeah. Thank you. One of the things to me, I think this is Molly, is that before answering and speaking more on how the Bible was used and weaponized, I am, a man of faith. My faith means so much to me. My faith in God, the way I understand God, the way I understand what God wants, the way God was revealed to us in Jesus Christ, shape the way I talk about marriage, about justice, about politics, about social justice, ethnic reconciliation, and so on. I come off everything from my position of my faith in God and who God is. And this is why I cannot accept the ideology of what is known as Christian Zionism. We have written a lot about this. We have written a lot on how such a use of the Bible turns it into, human political ideology that serves the interests of the powerful. This has been our problem. When you say God gave the land to the Jewish people, it immediately raises the question, does God differentiate? Does God privilege one group over the other based on what, their ethnicity? Really? Does God make some people superior over others? All these things. And so we have written a lot that if we understand God to be the God of love and justice, and we have to question these interpretations. And by the way, we have provided alternative interpretations. We have challenged these interpretations. But, to me, it begins with who is God to you and how do you understand God as well. So I encourage you to read some of my writings on this topic and others who have written on this issue.
Great, thank you. Could you clarify? You gave some percentages of land that was first given to the state of Israel according to the UN partition plan, and then how much they took after the war, and well, I guess after various wars. But can you clarify what the starting point was? Was the starting point the whole of historic Palestine, or what? Just to make it more clear.
Yeah, I am not really a historian, but I can look it up. The partition plan was proposed by the United Nations after the so-called Peel Commission from the British Mandate also made some plan of, dividing the land between Palestinians and or the Palestinian Arabs and the Jewish immigrants failed as well. So, and I'm pulling up some of these material from my computer. And what I said about the partition plan is that why do it to begin with? Who gives you the right to suggest dividing our land between one side or the other? So the plan gave most of the land, which is 56%, to the Jews, who at that stage legally owned only 7% of it. By 1946-47, when that plan was proposed, with the increased Jewish immigrants, especially after the horrors of the Holocaust, Jews were still around 33%. And in the partition plan in 1947, the 56% that was proposed as a Jewish state contained more than 45% of the Palestinian population. So what do we do with them? And then a lot of the land that was promised to the Palestinians or to the Arabs was unfit for agriculture, and it also kept the Jerusalem under international law. Palestinians, of course, rejected that plan because to us it was as if a form of, this is settler colonialism. Why should we accept to give half of our land to the new European immigrants? This is how they viewed it. And as I said, you have to raise the question, who gives you the right to divide someone else's land in such a way? This is the problem of the partition plan.
Okay, thank you. Two related questions, both related to two questions that both relate to sort of Palestinians' passports and their right to move around, to leave the area, to come back to the area. Do Palestinians, for example, do Palestinians in exile have passports, and do they have the ability to travel anywhere, or are they limited? And then are Palestinians, well, just about, I guess, Palestinian passports and ability to move around in general.
Yeah. So as I said, there are several categories. Let me begin with
Yeah.
the Palestinians in the diaspora. There were the Palestinians in the diaspora who left Palestine for various reasons, even if it's to study or visit relatives at the beginning of the 20th century. And then first England, then Israel denied them the right to return. Most of these were naturalized in other countries, the countries they immigrated to or left to go to. So they hold foreign passports, and they can only visit Palestine as tourists for 3 months. And if one of them marries a Palestinian who lives in the West Bank, for example, then it becomes complicated and it's hard to renew for 3 more months, and you have to leave and cannot stay in the land. There is the other category of Palestinian refugees who were expelled in 1948 and then in 67. Those refugees, some of whom still only hold refugee status, they have no passports. They cannot leave the refugee camp without special permission, including, as I said, many Palestinian Christians. These are the ones in Lebanon and Syria. And so those are the ones who are denied any right. They have not been naturalized in the countries they made refuge to. But some, like, for example, those in Jordan, or those who could leave the refugee camp and seek asylum somewhere else or move to another country, were able to get another passport. And then in that case can come to visit the land as visitors, unless it was an Arab passport, a Jordanian passport or a Lebanese, or then they can't even visit. So it becomes complicated based on what passport they have. In Palestine, there are 4 types of passports. There is the Israeli passport that many Palestinians hold in Galilee. 20% of the state of Israel is actually Palestinians. There are the travel documents that East Jerusalemites obtain to be able to travel back and forth. It's a travel document. It's different from a passport. There are the passports that we get from the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which are, by the way, rated as the 5th worst passport in the world when it comes to visas and rights of countries you can visit. So we do have a passport. I'm very grateful because it allows me to live in Palestine. To me, that's the best option. And there are the passports of Palestinians from Gaza, even though it's the same, but because it says you're in Gaza, it becomes even worse and more difficult for you to travel through that Palestinian passport.
Wow, that is complicated. Thank you for explaining. I'm not sure I can hold it in my mind, but it is really complicated. This question has to do with, I guess, with the Bible. Should we as Christians prioritize the teachings and role modeling of Jesus over the words in the Old Testament, such as Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount?
I'm not sure if prioritize is
Yeah.
Because my fear is that prioritize gives the impression that certain portions of the Bible are superior to others. I am a pastor. I believe in the whole Bible. And let me say this. There are extremely important and powerful passages in the Hebrew scripture, the Old Testament, that speak for justice and righteousness and peace. In fact, I can use the Old Testament by itself to challenge the apartheid policies of Israel. Passages like Ezekiel 47, which calls for Israel, the Israelites, to share the land among themselves and among the strangers who live among them, they shall be to you as the native born. I mean, wow, what a radical statement back then. Isaiah 56, Isaiah 2. There are many passages in Psalm 87 that speak of inclusivity, universality. a God of all, sharing the land. There are many passages in the prophetic literature for sure that talk about justice. Even in the Torah, the first 5 books, there are emphasis on justice. Now, of course, I believe that Jesus' teachings are special and they guide us. And I definitely believe in their direct relevancy even today. But I don't want to say that Jesus' teachings as if cancel the Old Testament. To me, as a Christian, it's much more complicated relationship than simply to say one passage is superior than the other. Jesus engaged with the Hebrew Scripture. Jesus used it in some ways. Sometimes he, paraphrased it. Sometimes he said, "But let me say how I do things," and so on. So certainly, sometimes he added things or changed things. So it's complicated. And as I said, there are powerful passages in the Hebrew Scripture on justice and peace.
Great, excellent. For years, Palestinian liberation theologist Naim Atik has written and spoken about de-Zionizing the Bible. I don't know if you've read that author, but it's an intriguing concept. Can you speak to it, or is this something you're not familiar with?
No, certainly. By that, he meant that we should stop using the Bible as a textbook for Zionist and Christian Zionists, because he argues it's not. And I think he's right, because let me explain the way I understand it. I don't want to speak on behalf of Naim, who is a great teacher to all of us. Zionism of today has produced an exclusive apartheid reality in Palestine. Some might look at Zionism as a good thing for the Jewish people, a homeland for the Jewish people, a protection and safety. And there is certainly, that's one side to look at it, but we cannot look at it and ignore all the other influences of it. From the outset, it was an exclusive ideology. I was recently asked to take part in a webinar, and the title was, "How Strong is the Biblical Case for Zionism?"
Ooh.
And I concluded that the biblical case for Zionism is as strong as the biblical case for apartheid. And this might sound strong to some, but this is our reality. Zionism has produced discrimination, oppression, occupation, and apartheid. Can we really justify that through the Bible? Yeah.
Well, is a key to that distinguishing between the Old Testament as a religious text and Zionism as a political movement that is quite distinct from that? It's not, I don't know, from my reading, it's not all that religious.
Zionism started as a secular ideology, but certainly had some religious dimensions to it. Religious in the sense of culture and ideology, more than in the sense of faith, actual faith in God, because many Zionists, were actually atheists. One Zionist leader is attributed to have said that he doesn't believe in God, but he believes God gave his Jews the land. So it's that kind of ideology that was then. The problem, Kathleen, right now is that Zionism has become a very right-wing religious ideology as well. It continued to shift to the right over the years, and today Zionism is dominated by religious exclusivists who are very fundamentalist in their beliefs and very religious, let's put it this way. And so this is why many Jewish believers, especially around the world, and some in Israel, are troubled by this ideology, are troubled with what Zionism have led, or what Zionism is doing in the name of Judaism, and that's why many are troubled by that. Sadly, many who are troubled are not courageous enough to speak up against it. And sadly, these radical or fundamentalist religious groups are winning the elections and are empowering or control, taking part in forming the Israeli coalition, and as such, impacting policies on the ground.
Okay, thank you. A couple of our listeners have noted that the link that you meant to post at the beginning did not actually appear. So if you could repost, I think it was the study that you mentioned early on.
Can you see it now?
I can see it, but can somebody else respond? Ruby Joy, can you see it?
Yep, here, I'll put it in the chat for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And Ruby Joy, are there any questions? I have been trying to look at both the chat.
So
and
I shared now my screen. I hope you can see it.
Oh, there we go.
And this is the Kairos Palestine. This is the Kairos Palestine page, kairospalestine.ps. If you just type Kairos Palestine and go to resources and run publications, you will find our publications, the several publications we have. This is the most recent one, Palestinian Christians and the Forcible Displacement and Disposition continues.
Great.
And of course, you can read the
That's
whole
great.
document on PDF.
Great. That's the most comprehensive. Ruby Joy, have I missed any questions that have appeared in either the chat or the Q&A? If I have, please jump in.
I think you got everybody. Well done.
Okay. All right. Well, gosh, thank you, Munther, for joining us this morning. Your insights and your thoughtfulness have been very illuminating. And thank you, everyone, for attending and for your good and engaged questions. As Ruby Joy mentioned at the beginning, please do provide MEPN with your input by completing the short evaluation that is in the sidebar. The link is in the sidebar. And just to remind you that if you have enjoyed today's webinar, please tell your friends about it, and it will be appearing as a recording very soon at the website mepn.org. If you are new to MEPN forums and you like what you saw and heard today, please do consider becoming a member through a donation of any amount. A link is in the chat for you to give by using givemin.org, or you may give directly by sending a check to MEPN. On behalf of the board, thank you for your support, and thank you again, Munther, for a terrific presentation, sobering, but terrific. And we look forward to seeing all of you at future forums. Have a great, great weekend.
Thank you.
Goodbye, Munther. It's great to see you.
Goodbye. Thank you and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.